In this video, we are going to be reviewing part one of our comparison of the Articles of Confederation to the U.S. Constitution. And for this, we're going to kind of use as a basis an assignment that earned 100% for a score. So we'll kind of talk about what this student did right and talk about some other ways to answer some of these questions correctly. Okay, so first up, for our first question, which it seems not to want to let me highlight. Okay, so we'll just read it. Read through the articles until you have completed Article 3. Then read the preamble to the Constitution. Thinking about the two passages, and here we're talking about the passages from the articles and the preamble. And so thinking about those two passages and what you have learned about the problems the U.S. experienced under the Articles government, what are three ways the principles of the Constitution, these should be pulled from the preamble as we discussed in class, can be seen as correctives to Articles 2 and 3 of the Articles of Confederation. I'm going to start down here because this was one of the first things that we discussed as one of your possible threads for answering, and that is the form a more perfect union as a principle from the preamble. And this student points out that the Articles of Confederation didn't promote unity between the states, allowing for competition. So the preamble wanted to form a more perfect union, fostering greater cooperation between states under a federal system. Now, another way you could have used the theme of a more perfect union would have been to talk about how the Articles had been a firm league of friendship that was too weak, and therefore the United States needed a more unified country or a stronger central government. You could have had both of those things. You could have also talked about that as kind of the same way this student did in terms of those efforts to provide more unity between the states. You could kind of bring in that state competition and conflict at this point. All right, one of the other ways that you could do this was to focus on the common defense language from the preamble. And here the student brought in the League of Friendship for this point, and that's also fine. Here we see the common defense through a more organized and unified military, which was certainly, in a very efficient way of getting at the common defense and earning the points for this part of the assignment. You could also talk about just the difficulty that the Articles government had getting the states to contribute military forces for a national military. You could talk about maybe a lack even of taxes to pay for a military. So in any of those ways, you could have talked about how the common defense principle from the preamble was meant as a corrective for the Articles of Confederation. Another way, and this one, I'll be honest, I had not anticipated prior to getting into grading these assignments, but one of the principles is we, the people, from the preamble. And the idea here, right, instead of the firm league of friendship, where the focus is on a central government by and for 13 sovereign states, this is now going to be a government for the people, in which the people will be the focus and not the states, and how the stronger central authority comes out of that principle of we the people, and the need for a stronger government. Now, some other things that could have gotten you the points for this, and that were common themes, by the way. Ensure domestic tranquility. Okay, for this, a lot of the focus here in correct answers could have taken one of two major themes. Could have been a discussion of rebellions, like Shays' Rebellion in particular. Or about how the states were squabbling over trade, as an example, in the trade restrictions they imposed on each other. And since the Articles government had not been able to prevent or really deal with those things well, we could see ensuring domestic tranquility as a corrective for the Articles. Another common form of correct answer here was promote the general welfare. And be careful with this, is some answers were phrased such that that statement was not in the Articles of Confederation, and there is a reference to the general welfare in the Articles of Confederation. So this isn't in the preamble because it wasn't part of the Articles, but I still think students could answer this well by talking about it. And so one of the issues here, a stronger central government under the Constitution, could better manage the economy. As remember, one of the problems under the Articles, well, actually a collection of problems. We had inflation, we had debt crises, credit crunches, so any of those things, right? And this would have been in order not just to have a better economy, but also more resources for the government to promote the welfare, the general welfare. You could also have talked, or instead have talked about a stronger central government to collect taxes. Again, so that we have more resources to promote the general welfare. And then just to kind of reiterate, the more perfect union because this student came at it from a different angle than other students did, and then other students from that different angle still got the points for this part of the assignment. And there, I've kind of said it in bits and pieces, but I want to make sure we've got it in a clear statement. The Articles firm league of friendship was too weak as a national government. So the U.S. needed a more unified country, or you could have said a stronger central government, in order to have that more perfect union. Okay, moving on to number 2. to which article of the U.S. Constitution is Article 4 of the Articles of Confederation most similar? What are two pieces of evidence that lead you to your conclusion? So Article 4 is the correct answer. So this is not the only time, I think it is the only time we get a matchup between two articles talking about the same thing. And for this, two pieces of evidence, this student used the rights and privileges of citizens. You could have talked about immunities for citizens of different states. You could have talked about cooperation in terms of full faith and credit between the states. Another thing that was frequently talked about and certainly was a correct answer, it was to also talk about extradition. Remember, if a criminal accused of a crime in one, well, let's say an accused person from one state fleeing to another state must be returned to the state where the alleged crime happened. So that's part of Article 4. And of course, immunity and for free citizens and full faith and credit, applying especially, and some students got this right without using the magic words. It's easier if you use the magic words full faith and credit, but you could also talk about recognizing the proceedings and judicial decisions of other states. That would have also been fine in that case. And I guess I should back up a little bit so you guys can understand the points breakdown. There were 3 points for A, B, and C on page 1. For number 2 on page 2, identifying the correct article, it would get you 2 points, and then having at least 2 of these items would get you the other 2 points for a total of 4 points for question 2. And it should also be clear, just because this is the first year doing things and it can be a little bit confusing, and I'm still kind of deciding some things as I go. The assignment was out of 66 points in Canvas, using the rubric that were actually 35 points. So I calculated your score out of 35, converted that to a decimal, multiplied it by 66 points, and that was how we got your final score out of 66. So if the numbers don't seem to be matching up, that is why. So just keep in mind that the total here as we go through will be 35. So to this point, we've got 13 points. Moving on to 3, Article 5 of the Articles has its counterpoint in which article? And remember, there were some corrections as we went. So 2 sections of the U.S. Constitution. And how do these parts of the 2 documents lead to similar and or different methods of selecting representatives between the 2 governments they created? Okay, so the correct answer in terms of the article and sections, so it was Article 1, Sections 2 and 3. So here, right, under both systems, at least partially, under the Articles, definitely representatives are chosen by the states. The legislatures, I was fine if you picked chosen by the states or chosen by the state legislatures. Technically, to be strictly correct, the legislatures were able to choose or determine the method of selection. It didn't necessarily mean that the legislatures had to choose the representatives themselves. But if you put chosen by the states or chosen by the legislatures, that was fine. And in reference to the U.S. Congress under the Constitution, the Senate, members of the Senate were initially chosen by the state legislatures. And that continues on for a while. When we get to some of the amendments, we'll talk about the change in that. But the Articles Congress and the new Senate were chosen by the states. to keep it simple. So they definitely were chosen by the state legislatures for the Senate. Let's put chosen by state legislatures. Okay, and that's for, in this case, actually Article 1, Section 3. And as you can see with this, I gave some wiggle room on matching up specifically the sections. I wanted you to know that all of the stuff is in Article 1 and Section 2. If you kind of mismatched some things, as happened here, I did not take off points for that. Moving on here, in the articles, each state was allowed to decide how to appoint its delegates, which connects back to this. In the U.S. Constitution, it requires that representatives be directly elected by the people of each state. And that was the only other thing you needed to have. So, I mean, this has kind of what's the same. And the focus here, well, let me actually just come back to that. Let's go ahead and type this bit first. So representatives in the House be directly elected. Okay. This wasn't necessary, and really, unless you had something that just caused a major contradiction that I couldn't sort out, unnecessary things I just kind of struck through, but it didn't count against anyone's grade. Where a lot of things for students went wrong with this particular question is by not focusing on selecting representatives. So a lot of you actually answered the prompt on the next page, number 4, here. Whereas this is different. Here we're talking about how do the representatives get selected, and not how many representatives will each state have in each house, but just how do we pick the people that are going to go do the job. And then here, again, the connection is to Article 1, Section 3, and also Section 2. So again, your relevant thing is Article 1, Sections 2 and 3. And in this case, what we're focused on is the very different representative arrangements. So as this student pointed out in part of their answer, so the articles, Congress had equal representation. And you could have said equal representation or 1 vote per state. Section 3 of Article 1 tells us that the Senate will also have equal representation. Of course, this one is different. It is 2 senators per state. And Section 2, and again, if you didn't really match specific sections to specific provisions, that was fine. Just need to make sure that we've got Article 1, Sections 2 and 3. So Section 2 tells us that states will have a number of representatives determined, put that on another line, by population. And so you needed to give me some comparison of the two, to talk about what's the same, but also talk about what's different. Some students talked about small states, large states, and that can help make the point, but be careful to not just say that there were now two chambers and representation was determined such to keep the small states and the large states happy. We need to talk specifically about, well, what is the mechanism for, or what is the determination for how many representatives each state will have in the Senate or the House. And number 4 was worth 6 points. 2 points for correctly identifying the article and sections, and then the remainder of the 4 points for what's the same and what's different. Question 5. This was the easiest one of the bunch in terms of how much you needed to write. You didn't have to explain anything. All you needed to tell me was that the first passage of Article 6 has its counterpart in Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution. And this is kind of that matchup between, well, not matchup. This is the idea that both the Articles and the U.S. Constitution said that states couldn't do things like declare war or form treaties with foreign governments. So that's to help you understand that there's a lot of the same stuff in these two documents, often very, very close, even in their wording. I think by now we also know that for this assignment, Article 1 is the longest article in the Constitution, and so most of your answers circle back to Article 1 in various sections. This was 2 points, 1 for the article, 1 for the correct section. Some students put Section 9 here, and I kind of treated it like an AP grader. If you had Article 1 and Section 10, even if you also had 9, you still got the 2 points for this. I probably just circled 1 and 10 on your graded assignment. Okay, moving on to 6. Consider the second and third passages of Article 6 of the Articles. And here, I noticed that kind of at this point, some students had gotten away from matching up the numbers of the prompts and lining them up with what was in the articles. So you did need to be careful here, just the second and third passages of Article 6. You could also say second and third paragraphs of Article 6. Now, how did the states violate these provisions? There were quite a few ways of coming at this. You could talk about foreign agreements agreements with foreign countries by the states, or treaties by the states with foreign countries. You could talk about states making agreements with each other that were like alliances. Those things were all fine. Okay, so again, just so that you've got it kind of typed out here, you can talk about how states made alliances or trade deals with each other. And remember, they're supposed to not make these kind of agreements or alliances outside of the central government, just between states, either a pair of states or a small group of states. They're not supposed to be doing that. Or also talk about states making treaties with foreign governments. Another thing that students could talk about here would have been trade restrictions, barriers, tariffs. Any of that would have worked here. by states against each other. That would have been fine as well. And there were some answers, if I didn't mark it correct and yours doesn't match up to these, there were some that gave good answers that didn't necessarily fit these usual things. Those were kind of rare exceptions in the grading of this, but some of you may find that your answers don't match up to either the example here or what I've typed in this box, and yet you still got the points. And that's okay. That's not a fluke. It's not a mistake. You did something right that was kind of outside of the box. And number 6 was worth 4 points, 2 points for each of these things. And then number 7 is worth 2 points. So this is specific to the 4th passage of Article 6, and be specific to those things, because that's, for a lot of you, that's where you missed the points on this. The focus here was, and it could really be a quite simple answer, how did states violate this provision? States maintained their own militaries. You could talk about armies and navies, that would have been fine too, which they weren't supposed to do. And one of the things, some of you may be saying that you got this wrong and you're not sure why. Keep in mind, the states were, according to the Articles of Confederation, supposed to maintain militias to be provided for the central government when it needed to call up an army. But militias are not the same as militaries. And so that's a distinction that we need to make here. Militias they're kind of what the National Guard is in the United States, but not quite the same. So militias really were kind of volunteer armies of people who just did this as citizens. They would train periodically. They were supposed to maintain a certain readiness in case they were called up to fight. But they were to be maintained by the states for primarily the purpose of being called up by the central government. What the states were actually doing was maintaining their own individual state militaries, including sometimes naval forces. As these aren't just the militias, these are being treated as military forces for the state and only the state. Okay, and that was the problem. The states were not supposed to be doing things like that. You could talk in some cases about military conflict. The key that I was looking for, though, is that states were maintaining their own militaries. That is the most straightforward way of talking about how they violated the provisions in the 4th passage of Article 6. That concludes the review of this. Sorry, I know that probably wasn't a whole lot of fun, and my voice is even worse canned than it is in person. You will be able to make corrections on this assignment. Please refer back to the instructions for the assignment tied to this review today. And remember, it's okay to take notes. It's okay to mark up your graded copy. I will provide instructions for those of you that choose to participate in corrections either before 7 a.m. or after 3 p.m. during the school week. But it is okay, right? And you should have been writing things down and kind of marking up your assignment as you went. If you forgot to mark it up as you went through it this time, you can re-watch parts of the video to get what you need to annotate your assignment. And if you have any questions, please email me or contact me through Talking Points, and I will answer your questions.